Hello and welcome to the next learning module, Narrative Films Telling Stories. Narrative storytelling has a long tradition in human history, and filmmaking is a big part of that. The main thing to keep in mind when we talk about narrative in film is that film is a visual storytelling medium. Let's now take a look at the difference between story and plot. Now, these two terms get confused and sometimes they're intertwined, and I'd like to take a moment now to clarify the difference between the two. Now, story is defined as all of the elements that make up a film. Now, in film, this includes all of the things that we see and hear in a film, plus it includes the backstory and anything that may happen in between the scenes that we don't see the action, but we know that there's something that took place between those scenes. And then also the continuance of the narrative after fade out. And then also includes things like the characters and the settings. An example of story would be the entire Star Wars narrative universe. Now, there is a great deal of information that can be drawn from this narrative universe that can inform the individual films and other projects. Moving on to plot. Now, plot is simply, in film, what we see and hear on screen. Sometimes these elements are presented out of order, but there is usually some sort of narrative cohesion that leads to cause and effect. An example of plot would be in Return of the Jedi, when Luke learns about his father from Obi-Wan Kenobi on Dagobah. So let's now look at the three film styles and how it applies to narrative film. We'll start with the realistic. In the realist style, the events seem to unfold automatically, and the presence of the author is invisible. These events are usually presented in chronological order and have some sort of cause and effect relationship. With the formalist, it goes in the opposite direction, where the events are told out of sequence, and sometimes there is no logical connection between these events. It's often associated with experimental or avant-garde filmmaking. And then the classical style, again, is somewhere in between those two styles, focusing primarily on the narrative. Now, as I said previously, rarely does a single film exhibit these qualities exclusively. There is often a combination of the three styles, but there is one that tends to dominate in most films. I'd like to take a moment now to distinguish between diegetic and non-diegetic elements. A diegetic element is something in a film that the characters can see and hear. Now, these are things that originate from the body of the story. This could be something like music playing on a car radio in the film. Now, a non-diegetic element is something that comes from outside the story of the film. Now, these are things that the characters can't see or hear, but the audience can. An example of this, returning to music, would be things like orchestral music that's playing over a battle scene, where there would never be a chance for that music to actually come from that particular setting. So again, it's good to understand the difference between diegetic and non-diegetic elements. Let's now take a look at some literary devices and how they're used in film. Now, many of these devices are drawn from the tradition of literature. Film studies got its start in many English departments and universities in the early days of cinema. So it's natural that they draw upon literary traditions to help analyze film. So the first literary device that's used commonly in film is called exposition. Now, exposition is when information is presented to the reader or the audience in various forms. Let's take a look at some different types of exposition in film. Primary of which is on-screen dialogue, but there's also things like voiceover narration, flashback, flash forward, visual diegetic elements, and other audio diegetic elements other than dialogue. Another common literary device used in film is the doppelganger. Now, this is a German term that is literally defined as walking double. Now, this is when characters or settings or something else, some other visual or even an audio element of the film is a reflection of something else. There's often symbolic meaning in that comparison. Now, you will see mirrors commonly associated with the doppelganger motif. Another effective literary device in film is the physical transformation. Physical transformations occur with a character or a setting going through a drastic exterior or physical change that usually signifies an equally drastic internal change. In the film Avengers Endgame, we see a very good example of this with the transformation of the character Thor from the God bod to the dad bod. Now, this transformation signifies something a little bit deeper than just Thor letting himself go physically. It symbolically indicates that Thor has given up on the inside, or has given up all hope due to his failure in the previous film with Thanos. Another literary device that's used in film is allusion. Now, an allusion is a reference in the film to something in the outside world or another piece of literature or maybe another film. The film Fight Club is a good example of many allusions. One in particular is when Tyler Durden has threatened the life of a clerk and has let him go, and as he's running away, he yells, "Run, Forrest, run!" Now, this is an allusion to the film Forrest Gump. Now, this film has many different types of allusions, but this is one that is a clear example of referencing another film in this particular film. Another literary device that's seen in film is homage. Now, homage is a type of allusion, but at a much deeper level. It's a deliberate and respectful reference to a previous work of art or film. A good example of this is in Kill Bill Volume 1, when the bride is wearing a yellow jumpsuit similar to what Bruce Lee wore in Game of Death. In this way, Quentin Tarantino is paying homage or great respect to Bruce Lee, one of the most influential characters in film history related to martial arts. Let's now take a look at the idea of visual metaphor. It's defined as a visual image that suggests a particular association or similarity with the character or setting or some other element in the film. An example of visual metaphor is in the film Psycho. In the famous shower scene, after Marion Crane has been brutally murdered, a shot of water swirling down the drain dissolves to a shot of her eye. Now, this visually and symbolically indicates that the life is slowly draining from her body. Then there's the MacGuffin, which is exclusively and primarily associated with film. Now, the MacGuffin is a plot device, which is an object or event or character that motivates the characters to act, but is not central to the story's themes or resolution. One that we're going to look at here is in the film Pulp Fiction. The briefcase is something that is a point of mystery, but it is something that the characters are actively seeking, and often death is associated with it. The color motif is also commonly used in film. Now, sometimes this applies specifically to the entire visual color palette of a film, or it simply is the appearance of a particular color that signifies something that's important to the themes and plot. A famous example of the color motif in film is in Schindler's List. Now, in this film, which is in black and white, there is a scene where a young girl in a red coat is being led off to a concentration camp. Now, there are many things that have been interpreted with this film in this particular use of color, but again, it shows how color can be a very significant motif in film. Irony is commonly used in film, and irony is simply defined as when the intended meaning is the exact opposite of what is expressed. Now, there are many different types of irony in film, and we'll take a look at those three right now. The first type of irony is verbal irony, when a character says something that means exactly opposite of what they meant. Now, this is usually in the form of sarcasm or humor, but we see this quite often in film and in everyday language. Then there's situational irony, when there is a stark difference between what is expected to happen and what actually happens. And then finally, there's dramatic irony. And this is when the audience has information about what's going to happen while the characters in the film don't. This is commonly seen in horror films or in suspense films to help heighten the dramatic tension in film. A good example of irony in film is in The Empire Strikes Back. In the scene where Han Solo was about to be put into carbonite, Princess Leia tells him that she loves him. His response is, "I know." This is a good example of situational irony that is comedic and offers a bit of relief in a very dramatically tense scene. Another literary device that's commonly used in film is in medias res. This is a Latin phrase that is defined as "in the midst of things." This is a way of starting a film or a scene in the middle of action without having to present all of the unnecessary action leading up to that scene or the film. An example of in medias res in film is the first Star Wars film, A New Hope. In the opening scene, there's a battle in space above Tatooine between the Empire and the Rebel Alliance. And then finally, there is Deus Ex Machina. And this is another Latin term, and it's translated as God's in the machine. Now, this is when an unexpected element comes in at the last minute to save the day in what seems to be an impossible situation or event. Returning to the original Star Wars film, A New Hope, we see this at the very end of the film when Luke is about to be destroyed by Darth Vader while trying to blow up the Death Star, and Han Solo comes in at the last minute to save the day. We are now finished with this particular tutorial video. It's now time for you to move on to the short film writing assignment for this module.